Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and boy have I got an exciting video for you here today, as an idiotic British man is going to look at a brand new vehicle. This is the GSOR 1010 FB, and it is looking like it'll be the first ever British wheeled vehicle inside the game. In today's video I've got a full rundown of the statistics that will be going into the super test, so remember, characteristics are scheduled to change, but we can get a real good idea of what Wargaming are planning with British wheeled vehicles today. So what do I think about first impressions seeing the British wheeled vehicle for the first time? Well, it kind of looks a lot like a Lynx, doesn't it? But remember, this is going to be a medium tank rather than a light tank. The armor looks very well angled, kind of has Sheridan-esque kind of vibe to the vehicle with the angling on the front. Turret armor is kind of angled from the side, but it doesn't really mean anything if this vehicle isn't going to have any armor. And boy, that looks like a bit of a chunky gun to have. All in all, I think this looks like a combination of a Lynx meets Sheridan. But unfortunately, as you can see here, it's only got 18 millimeters of frontal armor and 16 on the side. So even though it looks well angled, it's probably not going to be ricocheting anything. So before I give you a rundown of the statistics, let's see what Wargaming have to say of this upcoming Tier 8 Premium British wheeled medium. So the concept of them is they're going to be lightly armored mobile wheeled medium tanks with a large silhouette, with the wheeled suspension providing excellent dynamics to ensure the highest level of mobility. The hulls of these vehicles have been made lighter and they basically carry no armor. However, they will be equipped with guns that boast great gun handling and damage per shot parameters. Yeah, we heard that before with the Manticore. Is this going to have another battleship gun? So Wargaming is suggesting that the features of these wheeled mediums will be that they will combine the main features of both French wheeled scouts and classic tracked vehicles. The high specific power to weight ratio of the British mediums will give them excellent mobility, allowing them to build up to their high forward and reverse speeds, taking key positions on the maps during the first stage of the battle. But in terms of mobility, these vehicles will fall short of wheeled scouts, so their commanders will have to consider their escape routes in advance. So interestingly enough, the design specifics of the wheeled suspension for these medium tanks allow them to turn on the spot and to turn the hull at low speed. And this is one of the main differences from the wheeled light tanks. So everyone knows in a wheeled light tank you have to go forwards to be able to turn, and I'll be very interested to see how these vehicles are going to turn on the spot when we actually have some gameplay of them. Unfortunately, however, these British mediums will have significantly worse maneuverability than the French wheeled scouts at medium and high speeds, so you're not going to be able to duck and weave, but maybe use that speed to go in a straight line quite quickly. Wargaming suggesting that other vehicles such as the Chatillon 25T have a similar kind of feel. I also see absolutely no mention of this vehicle having a travel mode, and so if you find the wheeled vehicles a little too complicated, then maybe these ones will be the one for you, because you won't have to think about switching to increase your maneuverability. Wargaming go on to suggest that these vehicles are going to have bigger dimensions and worse concealment compared to wheeled light tanks. However, with a good view range, it may allow for active scouting in certain situations. But Wargaming is suggesting these new medium tanks will not be able to play the role of fully fledged scouts. Although, I very much doubt that. And with two sets of equipment on this vehicle, you're most likely going to have one setup for when you're damaging and one setup for when you want to play like a full scout build. And I'll probably end up using something like vents, vision system, and exhaust on this vehicle for those real sneaky maps. So anyway, let's get dug in to the statistics. Of course, in true QuickyBaby fashion, I have decided to lift all of these off and put them onto an Excel spreadsheet so we can compare it to the two other wheeled vehicles at Tier 8 in the game currently, the Lynx and the EBR. Before I do, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that this vehicle is going to have a 3-person crew with a commander, a gunner, and a driver. So I expect there's going to be a lot of pressure on the commander and possibly the gunner as well to also have the loader role on this vehicle, with possibly the commander, and I'm only guessing here, also having to fulfill the role of the radio operator. So if you want to get ready for British wheeled medium tanks, I thoroughly recommend you start training up a Brothers in Arms crew, maybe for all 3 of these roles, with a Crew 2.0 coming up, but definitely for the commander. And also, it should be known that this vehicle gets a very standard ammunition loadout of armor-piercing, APCR, and high-explosive rounds. So now I'm going to compare the GSOR 1010 to the Lynx and the EBR 75, and the large caliber gun that Wargaming is promising you for the British premium wheeled medium tank is 105mm with 360 alpha. Now, this is not bad at all for a tier 8 medium tank, although really the more that time goes on, the more normal 360 alpha feels when you've got a vehicle like a Borask in the game that delivers two 360 alpha damage shells within 2 seconds of each other, and you've got an AMBT which has an auto reloading 105mm with 360 alpha damage. While this is undoubtedly really good for a vehicle that blurs the line between a medium tank and a light tank, it's not outrageously special for a medium. Nevertheless, this truly gives the vehicle a trading advantage over a tank like the Lynx and the EBR-75 until you realize the EBR-75 has an autoloader with 2 rounds, meaning that it can deal 350 damage per magazine if it's able to deliver both of those shells with a very low intraclip reload of 1.5 seconds. This is further compounded when you take a look at the high explosive rounds on this tank. 460 is great, but the penetration is only 50mm on the British wheelie. When you compare that to the French tanks that are packing 75mm on both of their HE rounds, that makes them look so much more usable. And when you look at the outrageous HE that the EBR-75 gets, with 50% more penetration and 260 alpha damage for each one of its shells, that could do 520 if it's able to penetrate them. And it's got a lot more chance of penetrating its shells than the GSOR 1010 does with its much lower pen. However, this is only for the HE rounds. If we take a look at the AP and we take a look at the gold rounds, which are APCR on the GSOR, we can see that, wow, this absolutely trumps the other wheeled vehicles with pretty much like 40mm more penetration than the Lynx or the EBR on its standard rounds and about 30mm more penetration on its premium rounds. This gives the GSOR not exactly outrageous penetration. It's kind of within the realms of a Borask on its premium rounds, but much better on its standard rounds than a Borask, similar to the AMBT. However, unfortunately, if you were hoping that the GSOR 1010 was going to get an excellent rate of fire, that's not the case. It's firing less than 5 rounds a minute, which again isn't awful, but 1,770 damage per minute definitely doesn't feel special when even with an autoloader, a tank like the EBR is packing 1,909. So all in all, for the firepower of the GSOR 1010, it's looking pretty good, although it's looking a little generic. It's not super special, but it's not bad on the other hand. And this thing is not something that you want to take multiple shots from, that's for sure. Whereas other tier 8 light tanks or light medium tanks often don't hit nearly as hard. So now let's move on to the gun handling, and immediately great news for the GSOR 1010 with 0.33 accuracy, which completely trumps the Lynx and the EBR-75. Its aim time of 2.1 seconds, it's not bad, but it's not great like the wheeled vehicles, so this thing is not going to have the same responsiveness as them. And unfortunately, Wargaming haven't provided us with any of the dispersion values when this vehicle is moving, so it just remains to be seen. If it is like the French wheeled vehicles, which have incredible dispersion when they're moving, and that's one of the highlights of them, that they can keep moving and keep gunning against their opponents, well, that would give a definitive advantage to the GSOR 1010 with that larger caliber gun. However, I think that Wargaming will make the dispersion value significantly worse and more in line with a regular tier 8 medium tank, which will kind of force the GSOR possibly to use vertical stabilizers, which it really doesn't want to, because it wants to probably be pumping up its view range and its camo so it can play that scout role on the battlefield as well. Depression angles are positively normal, 8 degrees. The gun elevation at 16 is nothing really to write home about, but the turret traverse, well, it's not as good as the other two wheeled vehicles. 50 degrees a second is lovely, and you're going to be able to quickly re-engage your targets. Okay, so now it's exciting. Let's take a look at the mobility of the wheeled vehicles. Well, it's actually kind of not good news for this British premium GSOR 1010, and that is because while the vehicle's weight is significantly heavier than its French cousins, it doesn't really get the engine power, with its engine power being over 150 horsepower worse than the EBR-75 and barely better than the Lynx, which weighs less than half of this tank. Accordingly, this vehicle gets not a bad power to weight ratio for a medium tank of 23.7, but it doesn't feel like a wheeled vehicle in the form of the Lynx or the EBR-75, which really do race around. This gets further worse when we take a look at the mobility of this tank. 60 forwards and 30 backwards means that while this is a wheeled vehicle and it will have all of the advantages of not getting tracked in the same way that other light tanks do, which is an advantage on the French wheelies. How slow is this tank going to... Well, we know exactly how slow this tank's going to be. 60 forwards and 30 backwards. That is not going to be a hard target to hit. When we take a look at how large and how boxy this tank looks and how awful the armor is, it could have a hard time. And what is this that I see on the side of this British wheeled light tank? Maybe Wargaming took some of the assets that they were releasing in China as well. If anyone can read this, do let me know what it is. And I'm not sure if it's from Chinese or if it's Japanese, or in all honesty. So do let me know in the comments down below what is on the side of this GSOR. To add to this, the vehicle has worse traverse speed, if you wanted to talk about it from like a wheel turning point, than the Frenchies. So this thing definitely isn't going to get around like they do. And unfortunately, we don't have terrain resistances from Wargaming as well, which is one of the highlights of the French wheeled vehicles and what makes them feel so fast. And so this thing, it could end up feeling pretty slow compared to a light tank, but definitely one of the faster medium tanks at tier 8, giving even vehicles that we consider to be quick in the game, like the Kampfpanzer 07 RH, a good run for its money. And when we think about it, it's very comparable. It's almost got the same power to weight ratio. It's actually a little bit slower forwards, but a little bit faster backwards. Yeah. The GSOR 1010 definitely isn't going to be pushing the envelope with regards to its speed. Now, onto the armor of this vehicle, and as I said earlier, it's just very disappointing. This tank is going to get overmatched by absolutely everything that hits it, and while we'll have to wait and see whether this counts as any kind of space protection, it might be one of the easiest targets for a high explosive round in the game. And as more tanks have intuition and good HE rounds and people learn the capabilities of being able to use them, I do expect that the GSOR 1010 is definitely going to suffer from that. Luckily, however, this vehicle does have a substantial amount of hit points, 1,300, which is like over 350 more than the French wheeled vehicles. So this thing will be able to take a hit. A bit like a Borask, which has practically the same amount of hit points at 1,250. But with that awful armor, the large size, and it not being the fastest of tanks, yeah, the durability of this vehicle isn't looking like anything to get excited about. So all in all, the GSOR 1010 FB, it was always going to be a controversial vehicle because people don't like wheels inside World of Tanks. Wargaming seem to have learnt their lesson from the French wheeled vehicles, but it's just a little bit of a shame that they seem to have learnt their lesson so much that I don't really see them giving too many things to get excited about with these wheeled British mediums. When they go this slow without the access to a travel mode, I just can't really see them avoiding shots. People struggle to hit wheeled vehicles for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're really fast. Number two, they're quite small. This tank doesn't really seem to have either of those two advantages. And with Wargaming talking about it having poor mobility when it's going quickly, I think that this thing is going to have to focus on being as sneaky as it can to be able to get its way out of trouble. Nevertheless, the fact that this vehicle does have 390 meters view range means that it could be a little bit of a terror. Racing into position, not having to use coated optics once you've got a good crew, and if you're using a premium consumable, you'll be able to use vents instead with a vision system and with an exhaust, or maybe you could just go for a full damage build and still have access to a gun rammer to make you a lot more fearsome than the French wheeled vehicles could possibly be. Especially when you take a look at that alpha damage. 360 will mean that you can quite happily reset your vision with that 12 seconds reload in between your shells. And that's one of the worst things about the wheeled vehicles, is you just can't ever really get the shots out with the Lynx because you're constantly having to hide and only use that 240 alpha. So all in all, am I now super excited about British wheeled mediums? Well, not really. Considering this is the premium tank and the Tech Tree tank is most likely to be significantly worse than the premium tank, I don't think that these are anything to really get super excited about. However, on the other hand, for all of the players out there who really don't like fighting against wheeled vehicles, you'll be very happy to know that these ones are not going to be outrageously quick. If you can hit a fast medium, you'll be able to hit one of these. And I do expect with the chonky hull design and very low amounts of armor on this tank, you're not going to have a hard time damaging them if you do. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for my look at the GSOR 1010 FB. Really hope you enjoyed this sneak peek and overview of the the first British wheeled vehicle. If you did, give the video a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know what you think about the GSOR 1010 FB in the comments down below. Do you think it looks awesome? Do you think it looks awful? Do you think these British wheeled vehicles would be a disappointment? Or do you think they're going to be the next greatest thing inside World of Tanks? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.